The Mauritanian Railway shattered the barrier imposed by African landscape and climate, specifically that of the Sahara, in the goal to establish an African utopia. The railway mutated into a ploy for colonial support, and a French parallel to the Trans-Siberian Railway, importing criminals and discriminated races to slave. It led to the economic growth of Mauritania, as well as potential colonial abuse from European countries, long after Africa's quote-unquote independence. French West Africa, spanning from modern-day Mauritania to Nigeria, was a mix of desert, Sahel, and rainforest region. Specifically in the Sahara, nomadic Moors sailed the sea of sand like pirates. Mauritania was once described by the New York Times as having as many camels as people. Safe to say the terrain was tough, and the times were far behind the rest of the world. Like many other regions of Africa, it clashed hard with the imperialistic forces put on by the European countries during the scramble for Africa. The white man on his turret took the area by storm. Resources were so abundant, an 1886 pamphlet once wrote, "I know nothing to equal it in California or in the Brazils. Gold spangles glitter after showers in the streets of Exam. There, then, is the gold, and it will be our fault only if it remains there." It was not just gold, but copper, diamonds, steel, and other precious metals. The only issue was getting access to it all. Transportation was limited. Roads, though well kept, as seen in the Benin or Ashanti empires, were only realistic for short distances. Rivers were an option, as canoeing animals, salt, and other resources were done for thousands of years. In fact, Spain signed with the National Steam Navigation Company, operating between Lisbon and Massamedes, but that was about the extent of it. Rivers in Africa were fickle and turbulent, and even so, there are almost no waterways in northern regions of French West Africa. Despite these hardships though, the vision remained. Whether from optimism or stupidity, Africa was to become a utopia. Many projected that by the 1890s, Africa would transform into a major Christian world power. The four main influences of the race for Africa: exploration, commerce, missionary work, and colonization, all required a reliable method of connectedness and transportation. The only option left on the table was a railroad, and with that, most nations had two objectives: to connect the East and West, and to cross the Sahara, an idea first introduced by Monsieur Dupontel in 1879. This sparked a wave of explorers striving to map out the ideal route. Among these, the Flatter Expedition. In 1881, Charles de Flanquet ordered a group of men, led by Paul Flatters, to undergo a reconnaissance of a trans-Saharan railway. Locals led them into the midst of the desert to die, eventually leading to cannibalism. Safe to say, the Flatter Expedition caused a negative rapport with the railway. Yet, in 1883, France wanted to build a line from Senegal to Medina, daunting feat to say the least. After being granted passage by King Afuta, France sent in Chinese laborers to begin operation. It was actually Commander Cameron that stated to the Society of Arts in London that immigrants of labor was necessary for the whole West Coast, which would be provided best from China. As French construction started in the West, it was clear that many issues lie ahead. Early segments linking Narcod to St. Louis disappeared. Rains washed out roadbeds. Termites consumed wood from the train lines. Corners were cut without as much as a second glance. For instance, the company of Bataillon-Lys promised to import all material, but instead used unsuitable local soil. Segments were approved that would obviously result in derailment. There were constant false expectations that the line would aid the indigenous population and that local kings would not resist, but in reality, the building disrupted everyday life of those living in the region. France's public was completely lied to the entire time, with the assurance that the railroad would turn sand into lush lands of agriculture. Photographs were all that the layman got to see of the line, and the government always managed to make them look good. In media like newspapers, pictures of tracks juxtaposed with primitive huts were shown, a power move, illustrating foreign aid to local populations. Blueprints have the same fabricated effect as well, containing ludicrous and idealistic routes that had little ground in reality, but still gaining millions of francs in investment. In an article written by Professor Natalie Starostina, it was said, "The blueprints of the Senegalese railway soon became a valuable currency to advance a career in the administration." Grotesque exaggeration of French West development perhaps reached its climax in 1897, when Minister André Le Bon personally communicated to Senegal to inaugurate the Fadbir Bridge, 511 meters of the Peanut Railroad straddling the Senegal River. He performed ceremonies in order to establish loyalty with the natives, with reports of some shouting, "Long live the minister," or "Long live the Republic." Progress pretty much stopped for a 30-year interim, until 1928, the Minister of Public Works appointed Monsieur Mata de Valon to head a northwest railway connection. The question on most people's minds were how to get water to the train at all times. Some suggested the irrigation of the Niger River, although the solution was much different: the invention of a new locomotive, the diesel-electric. As the 1930s came about, the world was inflicted with the Depression. Post-World War I, there was a constant fear of brutal dictatorship and a state of uncertainty. As people do when they're in fear, they cling to whatever can promise certainty. The railroad was seen as a key to African paradise once more. However, there was one small problem. The line cost about 660,000 francs per kilometer, which was immense, when taking into account that the planned route was 2,000 kilometers. In 1941, the 1929 Matera de Valon blueprints were relaunched, eventually resulting in 3,500 kilometers, 1,500 of that through the Sahara. Working conditions were horrendously bad. Paul himself provided an account, saying the climate was difficult. Most worked with bare hands. There were racial conflicts, sandstorms, snowstorms stalling traffic, bedbugs, lice, epidemics of typhus, constant derailments, poor facilities, dry clay and wood barracks, and restrooms described as most primitive. He said that the workers were Spaniards, Jews, and deported communists. This racial precedent was later justified under the argument that it had rescued them from the Nazis in France. By February 8, 1941, the first 160 kilometers were completed. That's when the leading company, SNFC's resources became limited, and the deficit is stunning. The minimum cost of the entire project was estimated to be about 35 to 45 million francs. By 1941, SNFC only had 120,000 francs for the project. By 1944, all construction stopped. By 1945, the project was completely rejected. It seemed as if all hope was lost. It wasn't until 1964, but Mauritania found a use for the railway that would bring wealth for decades to come. June of that year, President Mokhtar al-Dada opened a mere 400 miles of railroad between Mount Kidia, a massive iron mine, and the Atlantic Ocean, where it is then shipped to Dunkirk. It is the longest train in the world, often stretching about 3 kilometers. In '64, the train could haul 6 million tons of iron a year. The railway was run by Mefirma, an international company owning mines in Mauritania. The French government owned a quarter of Mefirma's shales, while 71% were owned by private European companies. They requested a loan from the World Bank in 1957. When the appraisal ensued for the following years, the wealth was only thought to last for around 20 years, yet it is still running efficiently as of 2020. When I first read the World Bank reports on Mefirma, something didn't seem right. The company was run by all European powers. This is a common pattern. Third world countries are, through the use of economic influence, satellite nations of their former colonial powers. However, Mauritania is now in control of the rail line. Sidi Mohammed from the Mauritanian embassy told me that the train is the center of Mauritania's economy. When I asked him if there were any negative effects, he said no. In fact, it doesn't seem like the train's prosperity will slow for the next few decades. More than that though, it also supplies water and food to nomads in isolated villages. It is also used as a passenger train. Despite the lack of passenger cars, people will crawl into the iron cars and ride them. National Geographic conducted a stunning short film on a fisherman who used the train to haul his fish from one town to another. This iron camel has torn down both the geographical and, more importantly, the economical barriers of Mauritania. Its legacy lives on through the monetary growth of a nation and the prosperity of its people.